Jack was interested in fire. In fact, he was interested in people who started fires, why they did it, and how. He entered into those stories and saw them from all sides. Jack was an arson investigator. He did interesting work. He had interesting stories. He was an interesting person. But today, I'm interested not so much in Jack as in his granddaughter, Jess. Jess wrote Jack's story. Jess is a writer. She majored in English and anthropology. She earned a Master's of Fine Arts in creative writing. She was teaching writing at the college level when her grandfather, Jack, was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Jack wanted to pass on his stories before he died, but he needed help. So he asked Jess, who had the skill and, as it turned out, also had the willingness. For over a year, Jess listened to her grandfather's stories. She asked questions. She awaited responses. She listened deeply. She had been trained in how to use words well, but she'd also been trained how to recognize and craft stories, giving her attention fully to the subject at hand. What she was doing now was translating her education into a form of generosity and love. The fruit of that love was realized 4 days before Jack passed away, when Jess handed him a book she had written containing his stories. They were his stories, which she had received and crafted with her words, and now they were given to him, for him to give to others. And that's what happened. At his funeral a few weeks later, Jack had left a copy of his book for each of his friends and family. Since then, Jess has gone on to establish a career in ghostwriting, specifically ghostwriting memoirs. She listens to people. She learns their stories. She takes on their perspective. Then she uses her skill and her craft to put their stories into words for them. Few of us will ever be as skilled with the written word as Jess is. It is unlikely that any of us will carve out a career in ghostwriting. But that turn that Jess made is a turn that you are now being challenged to make. To turn your education, what you have been trained to do, into a form of generosity and love. Now, perhaps somebody could say something like that at just about any graduation ceremony, to just about any graduating class, at just about any school, anywhere. But I mean it in a specific way about you as Trinity graduates, because of the education you have received. Let's be honest. The Trinity education is peculiar. I still remember my first encounter with Trinity through a television commercial that aired years ago. The commercial showed students dressed up in medieval garb. I've since learned that this is the 8th grade medieval banquet. Friends, that's what they were using to advertise the school to the general public on television. I thought to myself, who would ever go to a place like that? The answer, as it turned out, is all of you, including my own son and his younger siblings. Questionable marketing wisdom aside, there was truth in this advertising. You yourselves may have missed the medieval banquet due to COVID in the spring of 2020, but those before you and those after you did it. What takes place there is what takes place at Trinity. You go to unusual lengths to explore subjects from the inside. You are prompted and goaded and formed to sharpen and broaden your attention. You have been led to ask not just what, but how, why. You've been trained in wonder and in depth of inquiry. You've actually been assessed on it, as we parents know well from the semesterly evaluations with your teachers. But here, dear graduates, is what I think is the truly challenging and important thing now. That you translate the education you have received into wonder at and depth of inquiry about other people. That's the turn, the act of translation before you. You've been formed to be interested in a wide array of subjects, developing knowledge and competency from the inside, putting yourself into different ways of thinking and seeing and acting, sometimes with costumes. This makes you interesting people. The turn is to foster ways of life that make you interested in people. Why is this so important? In the early 20th century in Italy lived a man named Pietro Molla. He is someone we would otherwise know nothing about, except that his wife became famous. She is a canonized saint in the Catholic Church, Saint Gianna Beretta Molla. But it is something I learned about and from Pietro that has helped me to think about what we need today. You see, Pietro was a capable man. While his wife was a physician, Pietro was in business. He managed factories. They carved out a good living. They were raising a young family. They could have lived a comfortable life, even as fascism was rising in their home country. As part of the fascist ideology, the well-to-do and respectable members of society would be expected to purge their society of lower-class people, of people who were not as capable, who were not regarded as socially beneficial. But Pietro, along with Gianna, had spent his young adult and adult years as an active member in a group called Catholic Action. What they did was simply come together to pray with other people. They got to know the people who lived around them, and they served the poor together with others. It seems so simple, but Pietro says that this commitment was decisive. By spending time with and learning about other people, by hearing their stories, by coming to see what was important to them, by getting to know the workers of factories and not just the managers, by hearing about the lives of the poor and the disliked in their community, Pietro says that he grew in respect for his neighbors. And by neighbors, he means any and all who lived around him, not just those who were like him, capable like him, approved of like him. In his own words, Pietro said, "If I had to sum up the essence of my formation as a Catholic layman in one single concept, I would choose respect for my neighbor. Catholic Action taught me great respect for others, and this attitude has been invaluable for me in my life. In the decades I spent in factories with positions of great responsibility, precisely respect for my neighbor saved me in the fascist years, during the war, and in the periods of great strikes." What is Pietro talking about? What was he saved from? He was saved from viewing others with disdain, turning would-be neighbors into enemies, giving in to the all-too-common polarization and tribalism of his day. Where do we see those dangers in our day? Quite frankly, all around us. Political life has become an us versus them binary. So much so that recent studies have found that Americans hate their political opponents more than they love their own party. Think about that. The hatred of the other is stronger than the bonds of affiliation with people like you, even to the point that studies find that Americans in one party increasingly see members of the other party as immoral. Not just wrong, but immoral. You could say we see the dangers of factionalism and tribalism online, except it's probably more accurate to say that we don't see it online. Rather, division and disdain is the hidden template there. It is well known by now that the algorithms that drive social media platforms, and especially YouTube, are designed to keep users engaged by showing them slightly more extreme, marginally more radical versions of the sort of things they've previously seen or engaged. Dabble in a conspiracy? The next thing suggested to you will be a bolder version. Watch a long-winded hot take? The next one will be a few degrees warmer. In this way, one perspective becomes stronger and stronger to the point that it becomes nearly absolute. And nothing keeps people engaged like having enemies to hate and to blame. I even noticed something pretty useful that is also, when we think about it, perhaps a sign of something corruptive. You know how on Amazon, you can see the ratings people give to different products, and then you can move on to read some of those people's reviews. Well, I noticed that now, before you get to the individual reviews, you are given a brief AI-generated summary review. The technology has mined the reviews of others to create for you a sort of snapshot of what these people generally say. That's pretty useful. But that move to summarize, to flatten out particularity into a general idea or statement or viewpoint, I think it is, if we stop to notice it, reproduced all over the place. Our technology is making summaries the standard. It is what happens when we take actual, distinct people with real, concrete, specific situations and problems and desires and life circumstances, and we flatten them out into a type. This kind of person, that kind of person. The summary replaces the work of getting to know others, of paying attention, of taking on different and distinct perspectives. Pietro Molla said it was precisely the hard work and the time of getting to know other people, personally and specifically, that saved him from the sins of summarization, sins that had disastrous consequences in his day. I would venture to say that you have been well prepared and well trained to resist the allure of summarizations, of polarization and tribalism, of overly dominant narratives and ideologies. Bald summaries would not do when you plunged into the Brothers Karamazov, or even when you were sent outside in middle school to observe trees and leaves, or when you had to sketch a portrait using charcoal, or a landscape in watercolor, or sing a ballad with your classmates in parts. It hasn't been enough to know that a math equation works because your teachers, masters of wonder in their own right, have wanted you and demanded that you see how it works and what we learn about the world from the elegance of the math. It has been a peculiar education because it is all too uncommon today for people to learn to think, to admire, to explore, and appreciate in the way that you have. In one of my favorite little essays called The Right Use of School Studies with a View to the Love of God, the philosopher and sometime mystic Simone Weil tenders a surprising and to some unpalatable opinion about what school studies are ultimately for. Yes, she says, it is important to learn content. It is important even to acquire skills for trade and work later. But these are not the ultimate purpose for school studies. Rather, she says, what forms the real object and almost sole interest of studies is cultivating the power of attention. A true education, a genuine education, a truly humane education, forms and even forces you to become better and better at paying attention to things. Attention is a faculty, a power that requires strengthening, that you get better at with practice under the right conditions. You certainly didn't like everything you had to study these past 4 or 6 years, but the expectations and the culture of this school formed you to pay attention with clear sight and a curious mind to each thing and to everything. You don't just know more stuff than you did when you entered Trinity. Rather, I dare say, you are capable of greater and more profound attentiveness to all things, fueled by wonder and depth of inquiry. But you know, the really remarkable thing about Simone Weil's little essay is not just that she makes this claim about the true aim of school studies. It's actually that, in the end, she ties the power of attentiveness to the task and the duty of loving other people. She makes her point quite succinctly. That power of attention that we cultivate in school studies prepares and forms us for the mature challenge of loving our neighbor. As she puts it, that whole challenge of loving your neighbor is found in a single question. The question of, what are you going through? What are you going through? To really ask that question seriously, time and again, of the people around you, of the people other people do not heed or notice, of the people who get lost in the shuffle, of the people you disagree with. To ask that question of these others is to risk shifting your center of gravity. If you really ask that and mean it, and work to understand what the other person is going through, then you're beginning to place your center on them, on their concerns, on their situation. You allow what matters to them to matter to you. You pay attention to the person, not a summary, not a type, the person. Paying attention to other people in this way is demanding, it's costly, and it's often painful. In that well-known parable Jesus tells of the Good Samaritan, there is one injured man in a ditch and 3 travelers who see him from the road. What separates the Samaritan from the other 2? The other 2 move away to the other side of the road for fear of impurity, to keep to their agenda, to be saved the trouble, because people like them wouldn't approve. And they just keep going. The Samaritan, however, moves toward the injured man and perceives well his injuries. In fact, the Samaritan gets down into the ditch with the injured man, takes on the weight of his condition, and lifts him out of the ditch so that they rise together. The Samaritan, with his actions, asked the injured stranger, "What are you going through?" The Samaritan asks it so deeply that he even climbs into the ditch with the man, a man who is from a rival group, and shares in his condition. That is what makes the Samaritan good. He pays attention. He lets the other person change him, and he acts accordingly. In our day-to-day lives, the wounds are not always as obvious as in the parable, and the circumstances of the people around us are more hidden. But like the Good Samaritan, we have to draw near to others, to really see them for who they are, to see what their condition is, to take on their perspective, to really ask, what are you going through? The parable of the Good Samaritan is not about moral platitudes. It is much more about moral geography. It is about where you place your attention, where you center yourself, whether you go toward or away from the injured, the ill, the foreigner, the other, the one who comes from a different tribe, the one who has an opposing point of view. Will you take on their condition? See what it is like to view things from their perspective. Seek to understand what matters to them and why. Be curious, wonder, inquire deeply. That doesn't mean you just become like the other person. What it means is that you respect them, you share something with them, and you show them what it means to be a truly educated, well-formed person. Someone unafraid to move out of themselves to cross the divide, indeed, to fill the divide with a willingness to understand. The education you have received has not only prepared you for this moral, more fully human geography, it has also prepared you to bend the law of physics. Because contrary to the laws of physics, we can stand straight according to the gospel only when our center of gravity is outside of ourselves. You have been practicing how to recenter your gravity through your studies. You were not merely asked to memorize facts and regurgitate information. You were led to see things from the inside, to seek after understanding and forms of study that actually prepare you well for empathy, for compassion. The translation I'm talking about now, where you take what your education has formed in you, this power of attention, and you direct it not only toward your future work, but especially toward other people. That is where the true fruit of this education lies. It is in who you become, what you are willing to risk for others. Because inhabiting someone else's voice and perspective, working so hard to understand that you come to see things through their eyes and can speak their concerns in their own manner, that is the height of generosity. To be at home in someone else's condition and to allow them to be at home in you. You have enjoyed a peculiar education here. Now be peculiar because of it. Resist the allure of summarizations. Sidestep the trap of tribalism. Call out the folly of polarization. Be instead that rare, necessary, healing, and renewing person who would rather climb into the ditch with others than to vilify or scapegoat them. Be someone who wonders, who inquires deeply, who cares, who unites. You are uniquely capable of learning other people's stories. Your challenge is to be willing to do so. Thank you, and may God bless you, class of 2024.